Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the early life of a figure who literally altered the course of human history, Muhammad. We're going to explore the foundational moments of Islam by digging into the historical and traditional sources left behind. Whether you know this history inside and out, or you're coming to it fresh, we're going to unpack the deeply human narrative and the massive historical footprint of these events, right from day one. So here's our agenda for today. We've got 1, the founder of Islam; 2, tracing the historical sources; 3, early life in Mecca; 4, the first revelations; and finally, number 5, opposition of the Quraysh. Okay, part 1, the founder of Islam. Born around 570 CE, Muhammad is revered by Muslims as the seal of the prophets. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, in Islamic tradition, it means he is the absolute final prophet of God, divinely inspired to preach and essentially confirm the monotheistic teachings of those who came before him, figures like Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. His preaching centered on complete submission to one God, and it's these very teachings that form the absolute bedrock of the faith. But this brings up a really fascinating question, right? Considering the sheer scale of his legacy, how do we actually reconstruct his life? It's kind of a giant puzzle. There's a pretty widely acknowledged oral gap between the actual lived dates of Muhammad's life and the dates when these accounts began appearing in the written historical record. So how do we actually know what we know? Well, let's get into Section 2, tracing the historical sources. To piece this all together, our understanding essentially relies on 3 main pillars. First up is the Quran itself, the central religious text. But interestingly enough, while it mentions certain big episodes, it actually gives us very little direct chronological biographical info about his day-to-day life. Second, we have the early biographies, known as the Sirah. These were written in the 8th and 9th centuries, starting as sort of heroic epics before evolving into structured compilations. And third, the Hadith collections. These are the massive accounts of his verbal and physical teachings, compiled generations later. Now, here's where it gets super interesting. There is a real, tangible friction in how different groups evaluate these exact same texts. On one side, Islamic scholars rely on verifying incredibly strict chains of transmission to authenticate hadith reports. They wanted to trace exactly who heard what from whom, going all the way back. Western historians, on the other hand, often focus on that oral gap we just talked about, and they highlight the more hagiographic, or highly idealized storytelling nature of those early biographies. Because of this, you absolutely have to know this term, isnad. It literally translates to the chain of transmission. This is the whole system Islamic scholars use to verify the reliability of a historical report or a hadith. So just keep in mind, whenever we're discussing historical or even supernatural events in this explainer, we're looking at them through the lens of these traditional accounts and the verified isnad chains that preserved them over the centuries. It's the framework holding the whole narrative together. All right, moving right along to Section 3, early life in Mecca. Looking at his early years, it's immediately clear his life was marked by profound loss. Born around 570 CE, his father actually died before he was even born. And then, by the time he was just about 7 years old, in 577, his mother, Amina, passed away, leaving him completely orphaned. He was taken in by his grandfather and later his uncle Abu Talib. But despite that incredibly tough start, things did stabilize. By 595, he marries Khadijah, and by 610, the Quranic revelations begin. Let's pause on that marriage for a second, because it's a real game changer. Khadijah was a very successful, wealthy merchant. She had actually hired Muhammad to manage one of her trade caravans heading into Syria. And she was so deeply impressed by his absolute competence and success on that trip that she ended up proposing to him. For Muhammad, this provided a huge shift. It gave him financial security, which crucially allowed him the free time to engage in deep spiritual solitude. And even before his prophethood, he was really building a reputation in Mecca. This story from 605 CE is a perfect example. The Quraysh tribe was rebuilding the walls of the Kaaba, and a massive dispute broke out over which clan would get the immense honor of placing the sacred black stone. It was getting tense, so they agreed the next man to walk into the courtyard would arbitrate. That man was Muhammad, and his solution was brilliant. He asked for a cloak, put the stone right in the middle, and had representatives from every rival clan lift the edges together. Then he secured it into the wall himself, a true peacemaker in action. Which brings us to Section 4, the first revelations. This is the supernatural turning point of our whole explainer. It's 610 CE. Muhammad is periodically secluding himself in a mountain cave called Hira. According to Islamic tradition, during one of these retreats, the angel Gabriel appears to him, and the source accounts describe this as an intensely physical, overwhelming encounter. Gabriel commands him to read. When Muhammad says he's illiterate, Gabriel forcefully chokes him, literally squeezing him almost to the point of suffocation. This happens 3 times until Muhammad finally memorizes the very first verses of the Quran. Now, what I find so fascinating here is the visceral, deeply human reaction the traditional texts describe. He wasn't instantly calm or enlightened. No way. He was absolutely terrified. The sources say he feared he was possessed by a jinn, even contemplating suicide by throwing himself off the mountain. Instead, shaking wildly, he crawled down on his hands and knees, rushed home to Khadija, and desperately cried out, "Cover me," just trying to make the sheer terror stop. In that moment of utter crisis, Khadija was a rock. She offered unwavering support. She even did practical tests, like having him sit on her lap while she removed her clothes to see if the entity would respectfully leave, which it did, proving to her it was an angel, not a demon. She then took him to her Christian cousin, Waraka, who completely validated the experience. He famously declared, "Holy, holy, if you have spoken the truth to me, O Khadija, lo, he is the prophet of his people." Okay, Section 5, Opposition of the Quraysh. So Muhammad starts publicly preaching this message of complete submission to one God, along with rituals of purification. And look at who actually became the first believers: women, freedmen, servants, slaves, and members of the lower social class. This new movement was a magnet for the marginalized and vulnerable in Meccan society, drawn to this radical idea of equality before a single deity. But the Quraysh, the wealthy Meccan elite, they were not having it. They felt incredibly threatened. They accused Muhammad of deriding their culture, denigrating their ancestors, scorning their faith, and cursing their polytheistic gods. They wanted him silenced bad. So what did they do? They tried to buy him off. They offered him admission to their inner circle, advantageous marriages, wealth, power, the whole shebang. And Muhammad? He steadfastly refused every single offer. Because he wouldn't be bought, the tension just skyrocketed. The Meccan elites finally went over his head, directly to Muhammad's uncle and protector, Abu Talib. They issued a flat-out ultimatum, demanding Abu Talib disown his nephew and hand him over to the angry establishment. They were essentially trying to strip Muhammad of his tribal protection, which in that society was basically a death sentence. And that leaves us with a profound historical cliffhanger for today. With his tribal protections straining and the powerful Meccan elite closing in, how in the world would this small, fiercely persecuted community actually survive? What drastic steps would Muhammad have to take next? Well, that is a story for another time. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the history around you.